evening, visitors. Welcome to the library once more. I've been wondering to myself if I shouldn't start these streams with the category of sort of just chatting, as I've learned that it's a good idea to get to the habit of just chatting for the first little time, for the first little bit of your stream, like 10 to 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour. Streamer preference, I guess, as I understand it. So I try to do that. And that is technically a just chatting category, I believe. However, I've also certainly seen some streamers not bother with that and just sort of start the whole stream, categorize the whole stream as the main point of what they're doing, which, according to Twitch, for what we're doing, is called writing and reading. We are severely not writing. We are definitely reading. I'm looking at my eyes move. At the end of last stream, we had a little problem. We noticed that my model had stopped moving, and it turns out that all of a sudden my computer decided that the graphics driver was too old for face tracking. And although nothing had restarted or launched again or no configuration changes were made, it decided that was a good time to say, hey, I don't work. Why don't you update your graphics drivers? Which, of course, would never happen during a stream. Hello, Chibi. How is the burb? How is Danny? Sorry to see you can't sleep again, but happy to see you here. He's, where was I? Yeah, so, as it turns out, some things had changed. There was a new GPU driver. I installed this. It still didn't quote-unquote work. I need to reboot the computer. Not terribly surprising, all things considered, with that type of install. And in VTS, in VTube Studio, there is a setting for the tracking camera. I haven't used VBridger for a little while now. VBridger, my first few streams looked like, if I push my glasses up or I scratch my nose, all of a sudden my model looks like it's having a seizure. Well, we don't like seizures. Dealt with those enough as it is. Thank you very much. To give cat food, and that's why Burb is awake. You had to feed Danny at this time? It's like 2 a.m. or something, right? And yes, Svelana's working on your plushie, apparently. She's been doing much plushie work. So anyways, as it turns out, VTS has they have a basic sort of 5 levels of face tracking, and I was using level 5 ever since decided that VBridger was a little too chaotic, and that's the one that stopped working. They have 2 other drivers for NVIDIA cards. There's sort of like the normal one, which I think is for cards from the 4000 series and older, and then there's a beta one, which is for the 5000 series cards. I have a 5080. Yes, be jealous. And it was not working before, but I thought to myself, why don't I try it before having to resort back to VBridger? Because VBridger is a lot of shaky business, but it was really good with the glasses. That was the draw. So I'm on the beta drivers now, and you notice I can nod my fucking head, right? That was something I complained a lot about, right? And I can shake, and you can see my eyes change, and I can blink them, and they're just fine. I discovered I do not have separate eyebrows. It doesn't look like a unibrow, because I guess the hairs in the middle must be blonde. But I have a unibrow. It's true. Miss likes her food at 4 a.m. in the morning. Holy cow. Oh, it's 4 a.m. for you, so it's not as bad as I thought. Well, UTC is 2 a.m. for this time, I think, is what it is. So, yeah. I just docked Chibi's time zone. Like, if anyone doesn't know who Chibi's time zone is, that's, well, you need to go find out. Flata. I made a shout out command. I know there's like, let's see how many there's. There's 3 people here. It's us 3. But you could like test the shout out command. I guess that would be this is a testing stream after all. This is appropriate time to test this. It's just exclamation SO. And that should work fine. There you go. Basic Nightbot. I have, don't spit. Oh, you're just a mug, right? You are a mug. You're a muggus. Anyways, I'm really happy currently with yeah, it's working. That's the Nightbot version. That's kind of really sort of old school. I am setting up StreamerBot, however. It's I only just got it, so I got it downloaded. I connected a few things, but StreamerBot will be able to utilize the native / shoutout command from Twitch. So you get all the cool little sort of gizmos and thingamabobs that Twitch throws in there, right? The like the pinned message, the little icon and stuff, and something, and this is important, I have been wanting and dreaming of since I found out about the stupid command. You know, Twitch has a 60-second cooldown for shoutouts. Well, you can queue the things in StreamerBot, and then as that cooldown and like expires, all the triggers that would trigger a shoutout will start triggering one after the other, and then putting it into Twitch. So if you have 3 people raid you, like you, Angui, and Zector did on one of my earlier streams, like StreamerBot, we go, okay, cool, these 3 people raided in because, well, you guys were doing like a shared collab, and then you just decided just to be awesome and nice, and then I didn't even shout you out to, well, honestly, your own people. But at that moment, StreamerBot would have queued you all up and shouted you out 1 minute after the next. I think that's super cool. I'm excited about StreamerBot. I know it is not such a new technology that it's shady or anything. There are a lot of very popular, very strong voices that sort of recommend and use this. And probably the most important of all things, it has dark mode. It does sound convenient. It can connect YouTube, Twitch, OBS, Stream Deck. There's a plethora of things it can connect to. It listens for all the events from all these things, and those would be your triggers, and then it can inject commands, all the commands you're familiar with, into all of these systems. Everything you can do on Twitch can be in action in StreamerBot. It will completely replace Nightbot, I believe. Stream elements I might keep for the chat. That said, StreamerBot does have the ability. It does have a chat interface, and it can have if you're multi-streaming, it will put all those chats together as well, apparently. So it's stream elements functionality becomes possibly still useful. And of course, that said, obviously StreamBot does have an API for stream elements. and OBS Studios, not Studios, that's for everybody, but the other one, the wimpy version of OBS Studios. Yeah, that one. The lazy one, I guess. I don't know, the one that people use because they want to. How dare they want to use something just because they can. I'm almost unhappy with the eyes because I catch myself looking this way. Right now I am looking about 45 degrees to my right, and this is where I can see OBS and my preview in OBS. So I'm looking at me, and this is me looking straight ahead, and this is me looking at my stream manager in a browser. So fortunately, this is where the book will be. There in front of me. That's where I positioned that because I'm aware of the eye thing, and the eye thing bothers me. But I'm amazed. I'm really happy that it's there. So I have started setting that up. I have taken, just before the stream, a product that was delivered today. It's called, where is it? It's called Singer's Soothing Throat Spray. Professional strength. It is disgusting. It tastes horrible. But there are some throat sprays that are designed for comfort and functionality, right? There is one that I bought earlier by mistake that's for dry mouths, and that's different from this one. There is a spray that singers use before they go and they do their concerts and stuff, and this is supposed to coat and protect and seal in moisture in vocal cords. And I'm not doing any singing, but I do a lot of reading, especially on these things we call reading streams. And towards the end of the 3 to 4 hour mark, my voice starts to get sore, dry, and itchy, even though I have a big glass of water and I go through the water. So I sprayed that a couple times in my mouth. That was like 10-20 minutes ago. I can still taste it. It is not weak. It's not as bad as, what is it, Buckley's? The Buckley's, that horrible, nasty medicine. It tastes awful, but it works. But it tastes awful. In fact, it tastes so horrible, it is actually a net negative on my well-being. Your medicine is harmful, sir. So, yeah, get on that. So we're going to see how well that does. Now, the real tragedy is I had 2 deliveries inbound for, what is it today? The 25th. It's the 25th of August, right? The 2 deliveries inbound. And what happened there is one of them is my wireless mouse and one of them was this throat spray. Well, throat spray shows up. The mouse is nowhere in sight. I go back and it's the 25th of September that it will show up. So, oh my God, I have a month of horrible right-clicking ahead of me no matter what. I am distraught. It is horrible. I am very sad. And could you hear my mouse? I know Valana probably heard it from upstairs. GB, did you hear my phone go bleep? Bleep. Yeah, big fail. I gotta wait a whole month now. That thing better be really good when it gets here. Okay, no, you didn't hear. Aha! So that is the NVIDIA broadcast filtering that sound out. That is really cool. And also one more test. I have a little ching ching thing. I'm rattling a metal straw in my glass mug. Could you hear that? GB, I'm asking you because Valana can hear things. Yeah, but can Valana hear it from up the stairs or over the TV? That is the real question. I will set my phone to do not disturb anyways, because honestly, who the hell wants to talk to people while you're streaming? You heard it slightly. Okay, that's pretty impressive though, because that's a really sharp clink, clink, clink. So NVIDIA Broadcaster has some pretty cool tools, and that's the noise reduction. So I use the Beacon mic with its onboard compressor and stuff and jazz. I pipe that through OBS. Sorry, I pipe that through NVIDIA Broadcaster, and then the NVIDIA Broadcaster sends it to Voicemeeter and to OBS, respectively. So I am impressed with that. Super happy with that technology. Yeah, I think I'll start reading. I have a couple of other idea thoughts. I finally wrote some down. You know, like the last 400 streams I've been complaining about. I have these idea thoughts. I have this idea thoughts page and I never use it. That was half the page right there. Half of my content. I wrote 4 ideas on it. Of course, it was all in the last hour or so, but that's okay. We're okay with that. One other thing I'm hoping StreamerBot can really sort of super automate for me is stream markers in my recording. So I know it can do to Twitch, and I know it can send it to OBS. And one thing I'm going to do is automate them when I switch to a scene, so that when I go through and do the video editing, I have an easier time of hopping to the different sections that I want to care about. Yeah. That said, let's hop over to our reading stream. Do I have I'm going to hit chapter marker. Of course, I have the wrong book up. All right, cool. We need to change that. I guess I didn't do all the things I thought I did. Reading book. Where just going to change this. That's going to become this one. It's like, you can't change this. I am locked. Don't mind me as I edit things on the fly. Yes, delete the thing. Nobody loves you. Go away. Yeah, I gotta do the one over the mantle too. Apparently, I have failed at this preparation. Image. Okay. Read dang book. Gotta get the right book out. Okay, GB. Have a good night, buddy. Sleep well. And a good morning, actually. Really. Thank you. See how long the voice can go. Okay. Click this over here. Edgar Allan Poe. This is all his stories, apparently. I put them all in this book. And then the book poster. Can I just change the... It didn't work before. But perhaps, if I am insane enough, it'll work this time. It did work, only it's a little on the large. So here we go. There. No one saw anything. God, this book is huge. Like, and thank God, because my eyes are just not cut out for this stuff. There we go. It's not cropped in, so whenever I resize any of it, it's like, nope. Does that look natural? If I look down like that, no, I'm just gonna hurt my neck if I keep doing that. Don't want that. Nice. Nice. All right. The first novel, or short story, that we're going to read is called The Masque of the Red Death. This story was published in 1850. It's a long time ago. Valana found a copy here that occasionally has some words highlighted. There are little links that you can open up, little sort of tooltips that explain the reference or the word. Because like 1850, as I've been told, is a terribly long time ago, and it would help to have some context from some of these older words, which I think is really good. There were some words in 1984 that I was a little tripped up on. So we'll see how this goes. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. Yeah, the redness and the horror of blood. Apparently Edgar still used double hyphens. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban, which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow man. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. That's scary. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. This is one of those words. Sagacious, having or showing keen discernment, sound judgment, farsightedness, shrewd. I'm going to make this page a little bigger. There we go. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. Castellated, having battlements and high walls like a castle. Like a mini castle, maybe. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and macy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress into the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons. There were improvisatori. Oh, I think so. The buffoons must be like, clowns and ludicrous figures. And then those that improvise like actors or poets. Oh, okay. Kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyways, if anyone remembers that. There were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. I'm going to sit back a little, I think. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber in which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the 5th white, the 6th with violet. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or a candelabrum. Right, that's the hanging stuff. A candlestick with multiple branches allowing it to hold a number of candles. Okay, cool. So, a candle, a lamp, or a multi-candle. I can't see chat at all. Okay. There we go. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire. A projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus there produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound. And thus the waltzers' performance ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds of time that flies, interesting, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. To be sure that he was not. Apparently it requires a test. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers, upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquance and phantasm, much of what has been seen in Hernani. Okay, what's Hernani? A famous play written in 1830 by French dramatist Victor Hugo. The play was classified as romantic and was opposed to people who were referred to as classicists. On opening night, Hugo was determined to fill the auditorium with his fans, so he handed out special red tickets. Loyal groups were seated next to anyone that might be tempted to try to hiss the cast off the stage. The auditorium turned into a spectacular field of battle. Liberals versus royalists, romantics versus classicists, free expression versus aesthetical conformism, and the young versus the old. I'm not going to read more of that. Much of what has been seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures which unsuited limbs and appointments. Oh dear. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There are delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There are much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from their rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock, which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now, again, the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which the rays from the tripods. From which stream the rays of the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and in the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. Disapprobation. Condemnation, the act or state of disapproving. Not surprising, I guess. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-heroed Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that, in the costume and bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in habiliments. Is that like clothing, the dress characteristic of an occupation or occasion? So like professional clothing. Head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. Oh, that makes more sense now. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom to have hung at sunrise from the battlements." Actually, no, it is that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, and for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth a hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and, while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, throughout the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached, in rapid impetuosity, there you have that, to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterwards, fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and, seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they had handled with so violent a rudeness untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. That was the end. Masque of the Red Death. These really are short stories, Valena. It's very solemn. They sure spent an awful long time killing the prince, and then all of a sudden, the other 999 guests all died in one paragraph. Party. The rich and powerful isolate themselves away from the dying world rather than helping those in need, thinking to escape the same fate as those they have abandoned, only to discover that had followed them into their own home. What a vicious plague, though. Half an hour to die. It's I wonder how effective that kind of plague should be. Just to nitpick for a little while. The most deadly plagues are ones that sort of lay quiet for a long while, not affecting anyone, but being extremely contagious and spreading whilst no one is aware. And then when the symptoms hit, we realize that it has spread to many, many people, and it is impossible to know who has or has not this plague. Those are the seriously super dangerous, the super deadly ones, right? That is the shortest. Well, there you go. It is interesting. And informative, I suppose, yeah. Take some water here. Yes, hydrate. Right. Our next story is called The Telltale Heart. I'm going to increase my resolution here. Cool. Oh, nice. At 190%, it fills up most of the thing. Good. How's my model going? Am I still moving? Cool. And looking back a little bit, maybe I should should recalibrate. Here, hang on. Here, all right. We're gonna look at this. How's that? Okay, that's a bit better. I sat back. I think VTS is interpreting that as I'm looking up. I must be looking up. It's really cool. What a great technology this is. All right. The Telltale Heart. This one was published in 1843. True. Nervous? Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. Shrink that a little bit. There we go. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man, and he had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked, I undid it just so that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. Sagacity. I think this is wisdom. What does this say? Shrewdness, having keen perception of the senses. Yes, he's very sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, and with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watchers in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was a groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, which was a watch makes, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bells sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feelings, but it continued and gained definitus. So definiteness. Definiteness. Oh dear. Okay, that counts, I think, as a flow. Until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed. I raved. I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. That was in italics. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here. It is the beating of this hideous heart. Are you sure that was shorter, Valana? A guy basically turned himself in. The difference I am hearing, I am thinking, yeah, mad with guilt. Yeah, that noise kind of his consciousness, his acute hearing turning him in. These stories they're fine, they're interesting, but I'm finding they're not. I mean, how could they have like the depth of like the novel we read? I'm going to run out. Yeah, we're going to have a very short stream. It's been only an hour, and we only have one more to go, which is fine. It's okay to have a short stream now and then, I think. But yeah. So the first story had a very obvious message, and this one was just sort of an interesting ramble. I'm not sure if there's a deeper meaning to this one. You know what I mean? There is a strange thing on the back of my headset. It is. Oh, it's a button. Okay. Button's allowed to be there. Let's move to our final story. And maybe the stream will be early. This one actually does seem to be a little longer. I am going to take a break though. I'm going to stand up, move around a little bit. Anything to drag out the stream. So I'm just gonna hop over here for a bit. I'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, I said hello to the kitty cats. I got up. I walked around a little bit. I think I need a cushier chair. Should look at that again. If I run out, I should read The Raven to finish. Okay. Yeah, we have like 2 hours and one story to go, so that seems promising. We can add a fourth story and make a liar of all my going live notices. Okay. Alright, until then, we will read The Pit and the Pendulum. Oh dear, there's like some words on here that I don't understand. We're gonna tumble through this. Impia tortarum longos hic turba furores sanguinis inoculi non satiata aluit. Hospit nunc patria fracto nunc funeris antro mors ubi dira fuit vita salisque patent. I assume that's Latin. I have no way of knowing. And I assume I have butchered every single word in that little poem. Is it a poem? I have no idea. Yeah, Latin. Quatrain composed for the gates of a market to be composed for the gates of a market to be erected upon the site of the Jacobin Clubhouse at Paris. That was in square brackets for some reason. All right, here we go. I was sick unto death with that long agony, and when they ate, and when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration, I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, Itchy. Said sneezing, sorry. Where was I? Thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate, were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with the deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound was succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the walls of the apartment, and then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white and slender angels who would save me, but then, all at once, there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless specters with heads aflame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation, but just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened. All sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad, rushing descent, as of the soul into Hades, then silence and stillness. Night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define or even to describe, yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In a swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon, there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that if upon reaching the second stage we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is what? How at least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not at all recalled yet, after a long interval, do they not come unbidden, while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces in coals that glow. Is not he who beholds floating in mid-air the sad visions that the many may not view. Is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower. Is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Mid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amidst earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a later epoch assures me could have had references only to the condition of seeming unconsciousness. The shadows of memory tell, indistinctly, of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart, on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless, and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this I called to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back to my soul motion and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and in my ears the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound, and motion, and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, thought and shuddering terror, and earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state. Then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility, then a rushing revival of soul, and a successful effort to move, and now a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness of the swoon. Then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. This is complex. I hate this person. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There, I suffered it. Why you hate them? I'm finding it hard to follow sometimes. I have this vague sense that this person believes they have died and are now reborn into the world, but they're still here. I'm not sure what just happened, if I'm honest. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt I lay upon my back unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed, yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we had read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished unusually at the Atos da Fe, and one of these had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be. Victims had been immediately demanded. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea had suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief moment I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward, with my arms extended, and my eyes straining from their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. What is Toledo? That's the second reference. A city in Spain, and of course this is not zoomed correctly. A city in Spain where many of the inquisitorial trials of the Spanish Inquisition were held. Okay, that explains the fear of Toledo. Yeah, it's a city. Scary city. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated, fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness? Or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out, without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket, which led into the inquisitorial chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. Serge? Maybe it's a potato sack. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry, so as to identify my point of departure. Raw linen, you think? It would make sense, yeah. A potato sack. Point of my departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although, in the disorder of my fancy, it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at the full length. Place the fragment at full length and at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So at least I thought, but I had not encountered upon the extent of the dungeon, or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time, when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awakening and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too much exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the surge, up to the period when I felt I had counted 52 paces. And upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more. When I arrived at the rag, there were in all then 100 paces, and admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault. For vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope these researches. Good Lord, what the hell does that mean? I had little object, certainly no hope these researches. But a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage, and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner, when the remnant of the torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it, and fell violently on my face. Doing tests and science to try and stay sane, I suppose. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet, in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sudden plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and as rapid closing of a door overheard, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom, and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world had seen me no more, and the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victims of its tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direst physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung until I had trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become, in every respect, a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions about the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have had courage to end my misery at once by a plunge into one of these abysses. But now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of the spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not, but when once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By a wild sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed, for what could be of less importance under the terrible circumstances which environed me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces, up to the period when I fell. I must have then been within a pace or two of the fragment of serge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon awakening, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall to the left, and ended it with the wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions, or niches at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal, in huge plates whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the carnal superstition of the monks has given rise. The figures of fiends and aspects of menace, the skeletal forms, and other more really fearful images, overspread the disfigured walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was the only one in the dungeon. That's a metal room, you might say. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back and at full length on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. A surcingle? A belt band or girth passing around the body of a horse to bind a saddle or pack fast to the horse's back. Okay, it's a horseback pack. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw, to my horror, that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst, it appeared to be This thirst, it appeared, yeah, this thirst, it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. This thirst, it appeared to be the design. There's like no comma there. There should be a comma there. Okay. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and constructed much as the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he commonly represented, save that, in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be the pictured image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief and of course slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the wall, which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this, it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that it had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length, from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge to a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by my monkish ingenuity in my torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents. The pit whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself. The pit, typical of hell, and regarded by rumor as the ultima thule of all their punishments. Okay. Recusant, one who refuses to accept or obey established authority. Okay. He's a recusant. He was a bad boy. Thule, pronounced Thule, okay, fair, was the northernmost part of the ancient world, usually an island and often Iceland. Ultima Thule, in medieval geographies, may also denote any distant place located beyond the borders of the known world, the extreme limit of travel or discovery. Okay, so in this case, the pit, typical of hell and regarded by rumor as the Ultima Thule of all their punishments. So the ultimate destination of all their punishments. Okay. For people who are defiant against authority, apparently. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise or entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of these dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and milder destruction awaited me. Milder. I smiled half in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing vibrations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with the descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down, and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed, and wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm, and lay smiling at the glittering death as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent in the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through long inanitation. Inanitation, loss of vitality that results from lack of food and water, the absence or loss of social, intellectual vitality or vigor. Okay. Even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such which are never completed. I felt it was of joy, of hope, but felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to perfect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations again and again, notwithstanding terrifically wide sweep some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron. Still, the fraying of my robe would be all that for several minutes it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dared not to go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if in so dwelling I could arrest here the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity, to the right, to the left, far and wide, with the shriek of a damned spirit to my heart with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as one or the other idea grew predominant. Down. Certainly, relentlessly down. It vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the ladder from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow? I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably down. I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed its outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unmeaning desire or despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable. Still I quivered in every nerve to think how slight a sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope. The hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death condemned, even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe. And with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought, it now occurred to me that the bandage, or circingle, circingle, which enveloped me was unique. It was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart any portion of the band would so detach it that it might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case the proximity of the steel! The result of the slightest struggle, how deadly! Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torture had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum? Dreading to find my feint and, as it seemed, in last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The circingle enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot bear describe as the unformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I had previously alluded, and of which Emoetia only floated, which Emoety, M-O-I-E-T-Y, one of two equal parts, half of something, okay? And of which a moiety only floated indeterminately through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. Whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once, with the nervous energy of despair, to attempt its execution. For many hours the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited for but the motionlessness on my part to make their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? I mean, if you're tied down that securely, I don't think the rats are going to wait. They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into an habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the unconscious uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs on my fingers, or in my fingers, with the particles of the oily and spicy viand which now remained. I thoroughly rubbed the bandage where I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the circingle. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, They swarmed upon me in ever accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom and chilled with a heavy calmness my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt the struggle would be over. Plainly I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must be already severed. With more than a human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The circingle hung in ribbons from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum had already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away with a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking, and slow. I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free. Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up by some invisible force through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free. I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered unto worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which at first I could not appreciate distinctly, it was obvious had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware, for the first time, of the origin of the sulphurous light which illuminated the cell. It proceeded from a fissure about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the walls were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vivacity glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal. Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting. Oh, most demoniac of men. I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the enkindled roof illuminated its inmost recesses. Yet for a wild moment, did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrested its way into my soul. It burned itself in upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak. Oh, horror. Oh, any horror but this. With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering as with a fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I at first endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place, but not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the king of terrors. The room had been square. I saw that two of its iron angles were now acute, two consequently obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant, the apartment had shifted its form into that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired to stop. I could have clasped the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said. Any death but that of the pit. Fool. I might not have known that into the pit was the object of the burning iron to urge me. Let me say that again. Fool. Might I have not known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Yeah, that's not a good sentence. Could I resist its glow? Or, if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back. The closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast as of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lassalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. Talk about just in time. It's amazing how the general got right into the torture room immediately after conquering the area. It's 9 o'clock. So, how long is the Raven? I should go take a look, I guess. Go up here, scroll all the way up here, and maybe we can actually get a fourth one in after all. Stories? It's the same website. It's a poem. It's poem crap. Is there like a... Oh, okay. Here's the list of the stories. Oh, maybe what I should be doing, I can't believe I haven't thought of this already, is showing the text as I read it. Is that not obvious? Maybe I'll sort that out later. Yeah, maybe I won't. There's a lot of stories here. Oh, looking for the Raven or other... Oh, that's the poetry page. Of course. I just click on the Raven. Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. We'll read this. I'll flex my butt a little bit. I think I need a new chair. Have I mentioned that? I mentioned the new chair thing. You'll notice in the thumbnail that I've created for this, there is a raven, and I'm staring at it. I'm having a staring contest with a raven. That's what smart people do. How do I throw an account? Yeah, I have a thrown account. That's right. Oh dear, that's funny. All right, drink the rest of my water and tackle this poem. Not quite the rest, because I'm drinking water from a big mug through a metal straw. It's a narrow metal straw. Hello, Gwen. Yeah, good girl. Yawn. I think I have both kitty cats down here. Maybe it's on your other chair. Suck harder? I couldn't suck harder if I had more scuff. Here. I broke my glasses. That is the first emote I've used since starting streaming. And I have 4 of them. See my glasses? How they fall down? Some people wear them like wrong. Well, they're not wrong. They're like, they tilt. This looks so much more sophisticated. This looks like, yeah, no, I just woke up. I can't, like, I just woke up from a nap on the couch after dinner. Just straighten my glasses up. Okay. Chapter mark. The Raven, published in 1845. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Ah, distinctly, I remember it was the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. I eagerly wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," I said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that scarce was sure I heard you. That I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. Surely, I said, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what threat is. What three it is. Sorry. Let me see then what three it is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a mote, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance he made, not a minute stopped or stayed he. I mixed up those words. God, that matters so much. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he. But with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, though, I said, art sure no craven? Ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though those answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as nevermore. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by a reply to so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what is utters its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking that this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven nevermore. Quoth, prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempters sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore. Desolate, yet all undaunted, this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there a balm in Gilead? In Gilead? Is it Gif or Jif? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. By the heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if, within the distant Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign imparting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart. Take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, sitting still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming. And the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul, from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore. That's the raven. I sucked at that. At least it's poemy. It's got lots of rhythm and rhyming. Yeah, I stumbled over a couple of words. I do that still a lot. These books, I guess that's the trade-off with public domain. You don't get copyright strict, but you also have to learn how to speak a lot of older, with a different grammar than you're accustomed to. I've definitely noticed, if I were writing this today, there would be more commas and obviously like more modern language. I did okay. Well, thank you. But yeah, I guess that's the price of not pre-reading anything. I don't want to pre-read things. I have barely enough time to do what I'm doing now and still enjoy it. So that's a consequence of that. And that I'm okay with that. But I do feel like the better moments of reading are a little more satisfying. Even the poems. I think I need to adjust my chair again. Okay, that's 4. Pop over. Just talking. That's 4. That's me. Definitely winking my eye, not scratching it or anything. Thank you. Next time, we are reading some children's stories. We're going to tackle that. I'm going to when I post that to YouTube, actually say, hey, this is made for children. So we will bear that in mind when we run that stream. Not that I think that we really speak or say anything that's inappropriate for children by any means here, but we'll see how that goes. That is a different experiment. I am not terribly a fan of children's stories, but they are part of the literature of our societies and our civilizations, and I would like to cover some of them. So we're gonna do that. I can nod my head. It's important to be able to nod. I'm gonna shake my head, then I want to be able to nod my head. And my eyebrows. Nod my eyebrows. I do wish I could do them separately. I might have to complain about that. Or, it might just be a matter of programming VTS a little more specifically. Don't wiggle them at you. I'll wiggle them wherever I want to wiggle them. So there, I'll just adjust myself in my seat. Get a load of my nose. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you for listening. Before you leave, please do return your reading materials to the shelves, and remember to be kind to one another.